Welcome to the Burnout, where we help teachers and education professionals recharge their purpose, revise their passion, and regain their power. The show where we tackle the problems in education, one solution at a time. I'm your host, Kendria Johnson, and we look forward to helping you beat the burnout.
Okay.
And welcome to another episode of The Burnout, where I help teachers who are good become great by bringing them out of burnout back into a balanced life. And on today's show, I have a very special guest. And when I say special, I do mean special. He is someone I met actually through Clubhouse. We connected through Clubhouse, and there's a lot of good people on Clubhouse. If you haven't checked it out, just try at least one time. And I found out about this gentleman just basically because his character is in the name of his product, hustle. This man was on his hustle when I met him, and I was like, you know what? I think I should follow him. I think I should get to know him because I consider myself to be on my hustle. So he is a father, proud father. He is an educator, of course. And he is, he works from home. He's the guru about all things working from home and remote working. And I love to hear him give his master classes on how you do that. And he's just basically a jack of all trades. But I'll let him tell you more about himself. Welcome, my friend Cedric. How are you today?
Thank you so much. I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it and the
Yes.
intro. And yeah, shout outs to you and everything that you're doing.
Yeah.
And how you're building and growing and steadily on your hustle. So I respect and appreciate that.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm Cedric Scott Jr. I am, as we just heard, I'm a father, proud, very, very, very proud, as well as a husband,
Mhm.
educator, author, a lot of different things. I work primarily in the education technology space at this point.
Mhm.
Um, and as you mentioned, I work remotely. I've been doing that since early 2020. Of course, with the ramp up of COVID-19 and that whole pandemic. But I already had the notion of working remotely, primarily because my wife came to me one day and said, "Hey, we're going to be parents," and I was like, "Yes."
Yeah.
I was like, "That means I'm going to work from home." So I made that decision, well before my son arrived
Yeah.
in March of 2020, and it just so happened that I was able to make that shift, leave my last school-based role as assistant principal at an
Mm.
elementary school uh, in I guess May, June of
Okay.
2020,
Mhm.
and been working remote ever since. And shifted into doing a lot of different things because I was able to get a lot of my time back without having to commute
Yeah.
and have a lot of the stresses that come with being in a school setting itself. A few of those things related to supporting in educational empowerment for our youth and students and children,
Yeah.
families, but also with educators. And with that, I've launched the number one movement for educators called EDUHustle.
Yes.
And the mission of EDUHustle is
Mm.
guiding educators to maximizing their time, talent, and earning potential. So people looking for new jobs,
Mhm.
ways to supplement what they're doing as far as teaching goes. Just a lot of different facets and really building solid community around supporting educators and those in the education space
Mhm.
through a lot of different ways and pathways. And the last thing I'll mention is I've also been able to launch and award a scholarship in memory of my mother.
Oh.
Yeah, I lost my mom when I was 10 years old,
Oh.
unfortunately.
Sorry about
But I
that.
created a STEM scholarship. Yeah, no problem.
Mhm.
In her memory, it's actually a memorial scholarship fund, and
Mm.
I've been able to award at least a $1,000 award for an African American high school senior
Mhm.
pursuing a STEM degree
Mhm.
the past 2 years. So continually running and looking to continue to support and give back in the way that I can through
Yes.
that. So
Wow, that's way more than I had on my resume. Some of that stuff is new. Now, some of that I did know, of course, that you're about your EduHustle website and the things that you're doing there, but the scholarship is new. But thank you so much for sharing that. I appreciate that. So, one of the things I forgot you reminded me of, principal. used to be an assistant principal. So that leads me to our major question. I asked all my guests the same question. What do you think is the biggest problem in education? And then I'll let you have the floor.
Well, I guess my answer to that would essentially be, and of course, I'm speaking in context of the United States. I don't know about anywhere else, but generally that it's a highly standardized system, but nobody really knows the standard. So, and what I mean by that is basically, you have state standards and things that you have to adhere to, and learning progressions and expectations for students, and even standards and kind of basis for teachers, how they are actually monitored and scored or anything like that. And then, of course, that being attached to salary and people's livelihood. So a lot of that across the board is, and I'll put the air quotes, standardized or standard. However, if you go across, state lines, it looks different. And for me, the interesting part about it is just really considering how you can have such a variance in a system that is for everybody essentially, right? And everybody's kind of looped into it, roped into it. So I'm looking at it from the lens and perspective of, yes, students have learning standards and things that they're supposed to adhere to, and which generally leads to some assessment, multiple assessments throughout the course of the year, but generally one major one at the end of the year. But even if you go state to state, and I would say even go to different countries, that is going to look different. So it's like, well, how are we actually measuring, success or the education level or standard, and then also thinking about teachers themselves, the folks who have boots on the ground, looking at just the way that they are in some cases treated, and the expectations that are placed upon their shoulders, because we know generally if you are a teacher, you are not ever just a teacher, right? Teachers want to teach, right, which is why they go into it. But you find out very quickly that the teaching component of being a teacher is a small part on top of all of the other hats and roles and responsibilities that you have to undertake to be a part of something that you are doing because you genuinely love it. Because then again, talking about the salary component, it's like, well, let's look at salary going across spaces. And you find pockets where the salary is going to be more respectable. For example, I worked in Washington, D.C. public schools, which, higher salary range in comparison to a lot of our counterparts across the country. But just even thinking about, oh, well, what about standard of living, for where you are? So I think it's just, it just becomes very nuanced to where there's not necessarily a common thread, that goes throughout. Because even looking at something like, and hopefully nobody throws anything at me through the screen, the Common Core grade standards, what that adoption and rollout looked like, and how some states were like, no way. And there's been a continued kind of tier drop off of people
Texas.
really, taking on that, and people implementing their own, or even taking the quote the current, Common Core state standards and maneuvering, manipulating, and turning them into their own set of standards. So, if I'm in Pennsylvania and I talk to a student in Georgia, it's like, well, what we get in third grade might be a little different. And I think, essentially kind of, the basis of it would then be to look globally, and kind of see what that looks like, because there are different places doing different things. But I think there can be something to be said about looking in places where they are seeing success consistently, kind of across, regardless of what the population is, where they are. But doesn't necessarily seem to be the case here, which is why you have a lot of disgruntled individuals in general, stakeholders,
teacher shortages.
I mean, and that's an interesting thing too, to think about teacher shortage, because if you ask me, there's not necessarily a teacher shortage. The teachers just aren't going in to be a part of what people want them to do. So like there are teachers walking around here, but they're just to the point where it's like, I don't want to teach. Like we're here, but we're not going to do that for that. That doesn't equate. It doesn't make sense. So yeah, we are seeing that people are like, I'm done. That's enough. And also looking at even families and what they're doing with children and pulling them out of schools. I just looked at an article recently. I think it was from March of 2023 that stated something like 30%. I think it was like a 30% increase in homeschool as there's kind of an exodus from the schools.
Well, do you blame them? Do you blame them?
No.
Because look at the rate of school shootings.
No, not at all. Not at all. And honestly, too, just in my experience related to kind of the standardized piece is I've actually been able to do a bunch of work within the homeschool sector.
Yeah.
And supporting in co-ops and all those things. And you look at the differences there again, where you might have a student who is at standard or at level, we'll say, for example, in third grade, based on what is expected by the curriculum or whatever they're doing in the classroom. However, we might also get to a point where that same student who is at or beyond that level or that standard gets bored and then becomes a behavioral issue. Whereas in the homeschool situation, there's a little bit more autonomy and kind of fluency there.
Yeah.
To where that same child can now basically move directly into what would be assumed to be fourth, fifth, maybe even sixth grade level work, so that they don't have that issue. And then there's no coincidence as to why you might see a child coming out of homeschool graduating at 15, 16 years old and ready to progress
and college ready. College ready and ready to go. Yeah. So there's several things that I wrote down while you were talking, because I'm a teacher. Okay. I take notes. First off, you said something very key. You are my third interview today, and you're the second person to say boots on the ground. We don't listen to the teachers who are boots on the ground. And so that resonates with me, because the standardized, what you're talking about, the systems of standardized testing, standardized this, standardized that, seems to be changing based on two things. Okay. Socioeconomic advantages and, skin color and race. Okay. So what I mean by that is very simple. Then I'm going to let you speak on another, something else that you said. What I mean by that is very simple. In my 23rd year, this is 23 years, in my 23 years of teaching, every single time my children, because of course, me being an African-American woman, I taught in African-American school. I didn't want it any other way. Brown and Black students is what I wanted. As teaching in, my own neighborhood where I grew up, every time our students, I just noticed a trend, every time our students would do well on that standardized test, they would change the test. They would change the test. They'd make it, it has to be more critical thinking on it. We have to have it more rigorous. That was a word they kept using. It needs to be more rigorous. Our kids would clean it up. Kids in the lowest, poorest neighborhoods were cleaning up. They were wiping the floor with that test. I won't even go into the names of it because I don't want to embarrass Texas. But the names of those tests changed literally in 5 or 6 years, because our kids in the inner city were, excelling and doing better and outperforming the students in the suburbs. So when you say things like standardized, that's supposed to be something for everybody. You and I both know the lingo, but it's supposed to be something that's everybody. Is it? Because our kids, even though they don't know all of the it wasn't made for our children. It's just, again, my personal opinion, it wasn't made for Black and brown students. They were still understanding what the concepts that they were trying to overreach for them. They got it. You put in SAT questions on their 5th grade. We got it. They figured it out. And then now, all of a sudden, we're going to do away with that one. Let's do another one. Right? So that I want you to speak on the changes that need to be made. Okay. We know the system isn't perfect. We know the standardized testing is the devil. I'm sorry, it is. And you said something about, what's going on and what's happening and what people do right in other countries. I live in another country, as you know, and they do some things right, but they still, again, are taking on some of those Western habits that are wrong. But talk to the person that might be looking at this a year from now. Okay, just pretend. You never know who's going to see this. Congressperson, a superintendent of a school, someone who might be in charge of a lot of homeschool curriculum, whoever somebody is that might be a change maker. I want you to speak to that person and give them your thoughts about some things that you want to see changed and want to see different. I'll let you have the floor.
Okay, for sure. Well, what I would preface in this was kind of where I was leading before is, there's a lot of conversation around, I think, comparative analysis within the states, right? One versus one, looking at Texas, Florida, New York, whatever, and saying, oh, well, the students in this state are doing amazing. However, at the end of the day, again, different standards, though somewhat relative. It's not an apples to apples comparison. Different assessments. It's not all doesn't look the same. But then whenever all of those students get to high school, and or for most of them, if they're planning to pursue college endeavors, then it's like, okay, well, yeah, you got to take the SAT or the ACT, and then things are kind of streamlined. But we have no idea about the preparation in order for you to get there and to know
Yeah.
what to do. Take that test.
Yeah.
So you can't backwards plan and say, well, students that came from these places generally do well on these tests because of what was happening there. You can't really pinpoint. So thinking about things on a little bit more of a global tier.
Mhm.
Honestly, I would implore people to look into, well, what's working where else. And I've heard and gotten some pushback from other people about, well, America wouldn't adapt this system, or it wouldn't work here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. However, if we want to talk about streamlined standardization of any learning and breaking this all down, anytime we have conversations about global and how we are doing as a country, then there's always the breakdown of, oh, well, the US is X number in terms of mathematics, this number in science, this in reading and language arts. So where are we pulling those metrics from? Look into that data and then think about, well, who's at the top? If we're going to use the metrics, let's use them. Who's number one, right? And you generally, if you're looking at mathematics, you might see China, Taiwan, whatever the case is. What's happening in those aspects? And I get that we're not going to be able to adapt and assimilate and pull in everybody's culture directly and infuse it in order to create exactly what it is that they're doing. But there are generally going to be pieces that I would say can actually be maybe not replicated as the actual term, but implemented in some facet. And to me, what that basically boils down to is what teachers do every day. It's called differentiation. It's literally what it is. So when you get to a point of saying everybody should not, in most cases, in terms of the testing and how it appears, I should say, have to go through the same exact thing and it all look the same, because we don't all look the same, think the same, act the same, and neither do our kids. Then it's like, all right, well, how do we adjust that? Because regularly on a consistent basis, day in, day out, hour to hour, minute to minute, a teacher in a classroom on a general stage is going to have to be able to adapt instruction to meet the needs of how many students all at one time.
Yes.
Right. I got this math student, like I think about my math classes whenever I was, teaching elementary school. I got students on kindergarten level. I got students on fifth grade level. I got students on grade level, which was at the time third grade. Like, but I need to make sure that they are all getting what they need. Then we'd start talking about equity. There has to be a conversation around that. So for me, I'm looking at it, and the assessment that I would reference is the PISA, and that's basically the international assessment that takes into account mathematics, English or reading, science, as well as, and this is a big one, creative thinking, or excuse me, not creative thinking, critical thinking, which is a whole nother facet that I don't think that we necessarily even talk about, because to pull out even more metrics and thinking about that, if we just simply look at what's the largest growing and best industry if we're talking about students being ready for careers, then we're going to say, oh, it's STEM, right? We're talking
Yeah.
about technology.
Mm-hmm.
However, if you look at vacancies and open opportunity
Mm-hmm.
for jobs, there's a big blaring hole in STEM. So it's like, well, if there's millions of jobs in this thing that we know
Mm-hmm.
is essentially the future and where we should most likely be kind of pointing our, our students, our children to, just to even give them, some type of, I mean, it's just not like forcing anybody to do anything, but at the same time, most children generally have a natural interest in something related to a STEM field. It's just a matter of like,
Absolutely.
how do we cultivate that? How do we make sure that we expose them to those things?
Mm-hmm.
Naturally, for me, I'm able to do it because my background isn't even in education. My
Mm-hmm.
original background is in chemistry. I was a chemist before I became a teacher. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's like, oh, it's simple, right? Not the same for everybody.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm just looking at like, okay, well, if this is where we know things are happening, we look at technology, we look at artificial intelligence, all this stuff. It's a big boom. It's happening, been happening. It's not going to stop. It's a snowball effect.
Mm-hmm.
How do we then take what we know to be true and implement it in a way that going across state lines or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
all students are going to be able to have some type of exposure and potential opportunity to pursue these things? That to me is where the question lies, because that's when we start talking about opportunity. We start talking
Mm-hmm.
about social status. We start
Mm-hmm.
talking about, what do the parents or the guardians do for work,
Mm-hmm.
and then we got to break down, and then we go into more societal issues that
Mm-hmm.
are based in like a lot of historical ramification that we don't have those conversations. It's like, oh well, we just send them to school and that's kind of the end of it. But
Mm-hmm.
there are a lot of like extraneous factors that don't necessarily come, to a head, and it actually does, I think, in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
the teachers a disservice to be able to support the students, because it's like, I
They don't
mean,
care about us, honey. They don't care about us. We know. We know. We know.
it's yeah, I mean, but yeah, again, pull it down, quick points, look at that assessment,
Mm-hmm.
PISA, think about what we're
Pizza.
doing
Mm-hmm.
internationally, who's doing well, how can we take that and make sure that our children are set up and ready for the future? Because what I used to think was we have to prepare students for jobs that don't exist yet. Where I
Yes.
am now, and more innovative and creative thinking, is we have to prepare students to create the jobs that don't exist yet.
Ah.
That forward
For
thinking,
for yeah.
what are
For
we doing?
now. Speaking of that, you are a major figurehead in that area arena that you just said, because what you just said, the stat you gave about 30% increase in home schooling, there is a niche there that you are already feeling that teachers need to pay attention to, because they were like, hey, over here, y'all need to be paying attention. Over here, come to my school. They have these online schools now where it's like you can actually recruit people that don't want to send their children to these schools anymore, these dangerous environments where they're not being safe. And they don't necessarily want to homeschool them, but hey, I will definitely just be in there and watch them do their work. It's going to be a big booming business. I can guarantee it almost in the next 10 years, because people are not feeling safe. So that is what you're speaking of when you say creating jobs that don't exist. You're absolutely right on both points. You're absolutely right. You are on point on everything. I hope that in a year's time, not even a year, let's not even claim a year, that someone, with some power and some money can listen to this, because my take on it is the people in charge of us, the curriculum, the school systems, the our kids standardized testing, all of the things that the decision makers are not in the same room with the people that have boots on the ground. You're not inviting us into the room. You're only talking to the other people who have never been in a classroom, or people who have money, or people who make laws. Those people have never been in a classroom. So if they all could get together and speak we would inform them about what these kids need, or what we see from our perspective. And you can get teachers from everywhere, in all grade levels, all walks of life, all flavors. You can get them in there and talk about the things that we are talking about as two people who know each other on a podcast. It's the same conversation. It's the same conversation. And I've had it 11 times now with some colleagues of mine, and we all are saying different things but the same thing. And that's why I say, if someone were to watch it, because my goal with this podcast is at the end of the year turning into a book, a collaboration of testimonies from teachers about how we can make the needle change. We can change and make the solutions come to life. We really can. We have the power to do that. It's just a matter of collaborating and getting in the right rooms and doing the right things and making the right decisions. But that's enough. Again, I can talk all day. What do you have coming up, Mr. Cedric? What do you have coming up? What is the big thing that you're working on now, and how can people get in contact with you?
So some of the major things really right now, just focusing a lot on EDUHustle, building out that community, supporting educators who are, looking to either transition roles, whether that be in going into ed tech or maybe even continue teaching, but, add something in addition to what they're doing, create things. I also have educational material and content that I produce myself called Melanated Mathematics, which is math and financial literacy in the context of Black history and culture. So I know a lot of people, produce things. A lot of teachers are very creative people, and they have ideas, but it's like, well, how do I go from, the ideation phase to the execution? And I'm, working a lot with that. Outside of those things, just really focusing again on like the scholarship fund and continuing to build and be able to just provide, educational and financial supports for students, and really getting into, reaching out. I've started within my local community, like Boys and Girls Clubs and, those types of organizations, to go in not only with, the things that I'm creating, but also to kind of support with building out some programs related to supporting, our youth and, doing the things that they want to do, and providing those resources and just the information. And at the end of the day, for me, ultimately, it's really just about taking in all the information that I've been able to gather and being in those rooms and rubbing elbows with people and take it right back to the people who need it the most. And be like, here, this is what it is. This is what I've learned. Do with it as you will, and maybe provide some guidance along the way for whoever is kind of in a space similar to where I've been, and that I can speak directly to in supporting. So, but other than that, trying to be the best husband and father I can be, as always too.
Well, if I haven't told you lately, I am very proud of the work that you're doing. Even though we don't speak on a regular basis, I'm always happy. I'm always cheerleading my people from afar and saying, please keep doing what you're doing. You're making it easier for me to come back and eat and transition back into the States. But right now, the climate, I'm good.
I don't blame
I'm
you.
good. I don't want to run from guns. I just don't. I don't want to run from bullets on my way to work. I just don't want to do that. The thought of it just scares me. But yeah. All right. So is there any parting wisdom as we close this wonderful conversation? I could do this for hours, but my podcast, unfortunately, is limited time. But is there any closing words you want to share with the audience about, the future of education and what you see?
For me, it's just, I would just really urge everybody to just listen, actively listen, listen to the children, listen to the teachers, listen to the families, listen to the people who are going through the day-to-day progression that, someone who is not in that environment is basically planning for them. Listen to them, and, take heed to what they say and acknowledge people's experiences and be respectful of it. Because, you don't know what you don't know. And what I found is that I don't know a whole lot.
I don't
So
either.
I pay attention. But
I talk to people that know stuff. That's the secret to being a genius is having people around you that know more than you. That's the secret.
I like it.
And with that, thank you so much, Mr. Cedric. I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being a part of the Burnout Podcast. And again, my name is Kendria Johnson. I am your teacher coach. And this show is meant to help teachers recharge their passion and rediscover their purpose. And of course, redefine their power. Thank you. That's going to do it for me. Everybody have a good one. I'll see you next time.